The mysterious capture the air was heavy with the scent of rust and old metal. The girl woke up in a cold, dark room, her hands shackled to a rusty chain. Her body ached from the harsh treatment she had endured, and her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't remember how she had ended up here. One moment she had been walking through a quiet forest, and the next everything went black. Now she found herself in a place that seemed more like a nightmare than reality. Around her, she could hear the sounds of distant footsteps, the scraping of metal, and the low hum of machinery. It was as if she had entered a world far away from her own, a world that didn't care about her pain or her fear. She tried to move, but the chains held her in place. Panic rose in her throat, and her breath quickened. What was this place? Why was she here? She struggled to remember, but her mind was foggy, and nothing seemed to make sense. The room was dim, lit only by flickering lights hanging from the ceiling. The walls were made of cold, grey metal, and the floor beneath her feet was covered in dirt and grime. There were no windows, no doors she could see. She was trapped suddenly. The sound of a door creaking open echoed through the room. The girl tensed, her heart racing as she turned toward the noise. A figure stepped into the dim light, tall and cloaked in shadows. It was an alien, a creature from a world far beyond hers. The alien's body was covered in dark armor, its face hidden behind a mask that revealed nothing of its emotions. It stood silently, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. She shuddered and looked away, trying to hide the fear that threatened to take over. She had heard stories about the aliens who came to Earth, stories about their strange, terrifying ways. But never had she imagined that she would be caught in their grip. The alien took a step forward, its footsteps heavy on the cold floor. It reached down, its cold, gloved hand grabbing her arm roughly. The girl gasped in pain but said nothing. There was nothing she could say. She had no power here. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let me go. I didn't do anything wrong." Her words felt weak in the air, lost in the vast emptiness of the room. The alien didn't respond. It simply dragged her across the floor, its grip unyielding. Her mind raced, thoughts of escape swirling around her. But where would she go? She had no idea where she was or how she could escape. The alien seemed to read her thoughts, or perhaps it didn't care about her desperation. It continued to pull her along without any hint of sympathy. They reached the door, a massive steel structure that slid open with a low, grinding sound. On the other side was a hallway, long and dimly lit, stretching out into the distance. The girl could hear the faint sounds of machines buzzing and aliens talking in a language she couldn't understand. It was clear she wasn't the only one trapped in this place. The alien pushed her into the hallway, and she stumbled forward, her legs weak and unsteady. She could feel the cold air on her face as they moved deeper into the facility. The walls around them were lined with strange symbols and glowing lights, adding to the eerie, otherworldly atmosphere. She had no idea where she was or what was going to happen to her. All she knew was that she had to survive. As they moved forward, she noticed the other aliens. They were tall, their bodies covered in similar dark armor, their faces hidden beneath masks. They walked with purpose, their movements precise and calculated. She couldn't help but feel small and powerless in their presence, like a tiny insect in the grip of a predator. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice shaking. The alien in front of her didn't answer. It simply continued to lead her down the hallway, passing through various doors and corridors. Everything looked the same, cold, dark, and lifeless. She tried to gather her thoughts, trying to focus on something, anything that could help her escape. She had to find a way out. She couldn't just give up. But how? What could she do in a place like this? The alien had complete control over her, and she had no idea where she was. Every time she tried to look around, the alien's grip on her tightened, reminding her that escape wasn't an option. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a large chamber. The room was unlike anything the girl had ever seen. It was filled with strange machines, their glowing lights casting long shadows across the floor. There were large metal cages lining the walls, some of them empty, others filled with strange alien creatures she couldn't recognize. The alien pushed her into one of the cages, its cold eyes watching her carefully. She stumbled inside, the metal bars clanging loudly as she was locked in. She tried to stand up, her legs shaking from exhaustion, but she couldn't. She sank to her knees, her body trembling as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was trapped in an alien slaughterhouse, a place where no one cared about her fate. She didn't know how long she would be there or what would happen next. All she knew was that she had to hold on to the small hope that maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who would come to save her. But for now, she was alone. Alone. In the darkness, as she sat there, staring at the cold walls around her, she heard the faint sound of footsteps. The door to her cage opened, and another figure appeared, this time, a human. The girl's heart skipped a beat. Could this be that one who would finally rescue her? Or was this just another part of the nightmare? The human stood there, staring at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her believe there was hope. Even in this dark, twisted place, she could only hope that he would be the one to finally set her free. But as he stepped closer, she realized that nothing in this place was as it seemed, not even him. The unexpected human, the girl's breath caught in her throat as the human stepped closer, his boots making soft, steady sounds against the metal floor. Her heart raced, pounding so loudly that it almost drowned out the eerie hum of the machines. Around her, for a moment, all she could do was stare at him. He wasn't like the aliens. He didn't wear armor, didn't hide his face behind a mask. He was ... different. He was human, just like her, but there was something about him, something in the way he stood that made her unsure. His expression was unreadable, his eyes focused on her as though he was studying her. She couldn't figure out what he was thinking. Was he here to help her, or was he another part of this twisted game? Who are you? She whispered, her voice hoarse from fear and exhaustion. She hadn't spoken to anyone in what felt like forever. Her throat felt dry, as though the words were struggling to leave her mouth. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the strange machinery and the cages that lined the walls. He seemed to be searching for something, perhaps a way to make sense of this place, just like she was. Then his gaze locked onto hers, and for a brief moment she saw a flicker of something: empathy, pity, she couldn't tell. He spoke at last, his voice low and calm, though it carried an edge of frustration. "I'm not here to rescue you," he said flatly. Her stomach sank. His words felt like a blow to the chest. What did he mean? Was he just another alien working for them, pretending to be human to lure her into a false sense of security? The thought made her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking as she backed away from the bars of the cage. "Then why are you here? What do you want from me?" The human took a step forward, his eyes softening, But he didn't open the door to her cage. Instead, he reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small, glowing device. He tapped a few buttons, and the sound of the cage's lock disengaging filled the room. For a moment, she didn't move, unsure of whether this was a trick. Was he opening it to trap her, or was this the chance she had been waiting for? Why, are you letting me out? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Human's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw something like concern in his eyes. I have a job to do, he replied, his tone quieter now. This place, this slaughterhouse. It's not just about capturing beings like you. There's something much worse going on here. Something that could destroy everything. The girls? Head spun. She had so many questions, but one stood out above all the rest. What are you talking about? What is this place? The human exhaled sharply, and for a moment she could see the weight of his words. It was as if he had been carrying a burden for too long and was finally ready to share it. This place is a part of a larger operation, an alien network that's harvesting beings for something darker. He paused, his expression hardening. I was sent to shut it down. The girl felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming fear that still gripped her. Was he telling the truth? Could she trust him? She had been betrayed before, and she had no way of knowing if this man was just another pawn in the game. But there was something in his voice, something that made her want to believe him. You're really going to destroy it? She asked, disbelief in her voice. You're going to destroy them? The human nodded slowly. I have no choice. If I don't, this place will only grow, and more people like you will suffer. A shiver ran down her spine. For the first time, she realized that this place, this horrific alien facility, was part of a much larger, darker plan, and she had been caught in its web. Can I trust you? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Are you really going to help me? He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. You don't have a choice, he said quietly. But I'll get you out, I promise. Just stay with me, and don't make a sound. We need to move fast. Before she could say anything else, he stepped back, offering her a hand to help her out of the cage. Her heart raced in her chest as she stared at his hand, unsure whether to take it. She had nothing left but fear and uncertainty, and yet there was something about him, something that made her believe just for a moment that maybe there was hope after all. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The human's grip was firm and reassuring, and for the first time since waking up in this nightmarish place, she felt a small spark of hope flicker in her chest as he led her out of the cage. The girl couldn't help but glance around, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. The alien overseers were still nowhere in sight, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they would realize she was free. Her time was running out. The human motioned for her to follow closely. Stick close to me. Don't make any noise. They moved quickly through the dark, winding corridors of the facility, the sounds of footsteps and distant voices echoing through the halls. The girl's heart raced, her mind spinning with questions and doubts. Who was this human? Could she trust him? And what would happen if they were caught? As they rounded a corner, she caught a glimpse of the alien guard store, imposing figures clad in black armor. Her breath caught in her throat. If they saw her, if they saw both of them, they would be finished. The human paused for a moment, glancing back at her. Stay close, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. With that, they continued, moving silently through the alien facility. The girl didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Her life had just taken a dangerous, unexpected turn. Trust or betrayal, the cold, sterile walls of the alien facility closed in around them as the human and the girl hurried down the dark, narrow corridor. Her heart pounded against her chest, and every footstep seemed to echo like a drumbeat in her ears. She could feel the weight of the silence between them. The girl wanted to ask him so many questions, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the answers. The flicker of hope he had given her was quickly being overshadowed by the fear that still gripped her. The human moved with purpose, his eyes constantly scanning the hall, searching for any signs of danger. He didn't speak, didn't look back, but she knew he was aware of every movement in the shadows. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, seemed to heighten the tension. The girl couldn't help but feel like they were walking on a knife's edge, and one wrong move could send them both into the hands of the alien guards. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, breaking the silence that had hung between them since they left the cage. The human glanced back at her, his expression tight, his face partially hidden by the low light. "We're getting out, but it's not going to be easy." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a hint of uncertainty she hadn't noticed before. The girl hesitated, her instincts telling her to question everything about him. What did he mean by getting out? Was this just a temporary escape, or was he leading her to something else entirely? What if this was all part of their plan, some elaborate trap to draw her in closer? Her trust in him was fragile, like a thin thread holding her together. Every moment she spent with him felt like a balancing act, teetering between hope and doubt. "You said you were here to destroy this place," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But how do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know you're not just leading me into another cage or worse?" The human stopped suddenly, turning to face her. The cold, calculating look in his eyes softened just a little, and she could see the wariness etched into his features. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "I'm here because I have to finish what I started. I didn't ask for this mission, but it's the only way to stop this place from spreading." She swallowed, her mind racing with the possibilities. What if he was right? What if he was telling the truth, and this was her only chance to escape? Or what if he was just another piece in the alien puzzle, another puppet in their twisted game? The uncertainty was like a storm brewing inside her, and she couldn't tell which direction it would strike. "You expect me to just trust you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human's face hardened. "I don't expect anything. I just need you to stay with me. This isn't a choice you can make alone." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. The girl froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The human's eyes narrowed, and he gestured for her to stay silent. Without another word, he pulled her into a small alcove, the shadows swallowing them both. They pressed against the cold, hard wall, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Her pulse raced in her ears as she tried to calm herself, to hold back the panic that threatened to consume her. The human stood perfectly still beside her, his breath shallow, his eyes scanning the corridor. The sound of the footsteps stopped just outside the alcove, and for a few terrifying seconds, everything was silent. The girl held her breath, praying they wouldn't be discovered. The alien guards were ruthless, and if they found them now, there would be no escape. Her mind flashed back to the cage, to the cold hands of the aliens that had held her captive, and she couldn't bear the thought of being caught again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps began to fade. The human waited a few more moments, then slowly released his grip on her arm. He turned to face her, his face tense but unreadable. "We're not safe here," he whispered. "We need to move. Now." The girl nodded, her mind still spinning with questions. But she couldn't stay in the alcove forever. She had no choice but to follow him, to trust him, even if every instinct inside her screamed not to, as they continued down the hallway. The girl tried to steady her breathing. The shadows around them felt heavier now, pressing in on her, suffocating. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said about the mission, about destroying the facility. Was it true? Was he really working to bring down the aliens and end their operations here? Or was he just using her, as everyone else had before? For the first time since she had been captured, she felt a flicker of anger rise within her. She had been betrayed too many times, had trusted too many people who had let her down. How could she be sure this man wasn't just another part of the system that had broken her, used her, and left her behind? She glanced up at him, her voice firm despite the doubt swirling in her mind. "If you're really here to help me, then why don't you tell me everything? Why don't you tell me who you really are and what you're planning?" The human didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes straight ahead, his pace steady but purposeful. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. "I'll tell you everything, but not here. We need to be somewhere safe." She bit her lip, frustration building, but she had no choice. She had to trust him, at least for now. She had to believe that there was still a chance for freedom, a chance to get out of this nightmare. But deep down, she knew that trusting him would be the hardest decision of her life, because if he was lying, if he betrayed her, there would be no second chances. A fight for freedom. The air was thick with tension as the human and the girl moved deeper into the alien facility. Every step they took seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, with each turn and shadow playing tricks on the girl's mind. Every creak of metal, every distant hum of machinery, made her feel like they were being watched, hunted. They had to move quickly. The girl could sense the urgency in the human's movements. He didn't look back at her. His eyes were fixed ahead, scanning every corner with military precision. She felt small next to him, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope. It was strange after all that had happened, after everything she'd been through, she couldn't help but trust him, just a little. But she also knew that trust could be a dangerous thing in this place. The human's footsteps were steady, confident, while hers were shaky and unsure. She had been through so much already, and her body felt like it couldn't take much more. The chains had left bruises on her wrists, and the memories of being locked in that cage haunted her every step. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. She had to focus, had to stay alive. For as long as she was with him, there was still a chance. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the halls. The sharp sound cut through the silence like a knife, making the girl's blood run cold. Her eyes widened in panic. "They've found us," she whispered frantically. The human didn't falter. He didn't even flinch. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and commanding. "We need to keep moving." Before the girl could respond, the sound of alien soldiers' footsteps reached her ears. They were close to close. She could hear their low voices, their alien language echoing through the corridors. The human grabbed her arm and pulled her into a narrow alcove, the darkness swallowing them whole. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she could barely breathe as they crouched in the shadows, trying to stay as silent as possible. The sound of the soldiers grew louder, their heavy boots reverberating through the hall. The girl could feel her pulse in her throat, and every fiber of her being screamed for them to run. The human held his breath, his hand gripping her arm tightly, steadying her. His eyes were fixed on the soldiers as they passed, unaware of their presence. The girl could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. One wrong move, one sound, and they would be caught. She had to stay still, stay quiet. Time seemed to stretch on forever as the soldiers walked past, their voices fading into the distance. The girl could barely hear her own breath over the pounding of her heart. But slowly, as the footsteps grew fainter, she began to breathe again. The danger had passed for now. The human slowly released his grip on her arm, but he didn't relax. His eyes were alert, constantly scanning their surroundings. "We need to move," he said, his voice firm. Now, without waiting for her response, he led her out of the alcove, moving quickly but cautiously through the hall. The girl followed, her legs trembling from the tension. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she forced herself to stay focused. They couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. They rounded a corner and came to a large door. The human stepped up to it, pressing a small device to the panel next to the door. The lock clicked open with a soft hiss. He looked back at her, his expression hard. "This is it," he said. "We're almost there." The girl's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. They were almost free. Almost. The thought of stepping out of this hellish place, of escaping the endless nightmare, filled her with a sense of relief she hadn't felt in days. But there was still a nagging doubt at the back of her mind. What if they were caught at the last second? What if the escape was just another trap? Before she could voice her concerns, the human pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It looked like an abandoned control room. Old computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with static. The room seemed empty, but the girl couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She stepped inside, and the human followed, closing the door behind them. He quickly moved to one of the computers and began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the keys. "I need to hack into their system," he muttered under his breath. "We can't leave until we disable their tracking devices." The girl nodded, trying to keep her eyes on their surroundings. She didn't know how long they had before the alien soldiers realized what was happening. Her gaze shifted nervously to the door. Every second felt like an eternity. The human worked quickly, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the computer screen. "Almost there," he said, his voice tight with concentration. Suddenly, the door rattled. The girl's heart skipped a beat. She froze, her eyes wide with panic. The sound of footsteps, faster now, approached from the hallway. "Get down," the human hissed, pulling her down to the floor behind a desk. They crouched low, both holding their breath. The door was still slightly ajar, and the girl could see the shadows of the soldiers growing larger as they neared. Time seemed to slow. The girl could hear the soldiers' voices as they spoke to each other, their language alien and incomprehensible. She closed her eyes, praying they wouldn't find them. This was it. They were so close, just a few more moments, and they could escape. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The girl held her breath, her body tense with fear. Was this the end? Then, Just as suddenly as it had started, the sound of the footsteps faded away. The soldiers had moved on. The human exhaled a long, quiet breath. That was too close. He muttered, standing up quickly. "We need to go." Before the girl could speak, he grabbed her arm once more, pulling her toward the exit. They had to make their move now. The truth behind the slaughterhouse, the human and the girl moved quickly through the dark, winding corridors of the alien facility. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence, their breaths quickening with every step. The girl's heart was racing, part fear, part anticipation. They had come so far, and yet the fear of being caught still hung over them like a dark cloud. She couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, making sure no one was following them. As they turned another corner, the human slowed down, glancing around cautiously before stopping in front of a large metal door. The girl couldn't see through the cracks of the door, but she could feel the presence of something behind it, something important. "This is it," the human said quietly, his voice full of determination. "We need to get inside. This room holds everything, the answers you've been asking for." The girl's mind raced. What could be behind this door? What answers could he possibly be talking about? She had already learned more than she ever expected to about the facility, but there was still so much left unknown, so much that didn't make sense. "What's in there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he pressed a button on a small device he was holding, and the metal door slid open with a quiet hiss. The room beyond was dimly lit, its contents difficult to make out from where they stood. The human stepped in first, and the girl followed cautiously, her eyes scanning the room as her senses heightened. The room was filled with large tanks, each one humming softly. Inside the tanks were beings, some she recognized, some she didn't. They were alien, human-like, but with strange features, extra limbs, different colored skin, and eyes that seemed far too large for their faces. The tanks were filled with some sort of glowing liquid, and the creatures floated motionlessly inside, suspended as if in some kind of stasis. The girl's breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The human didn't answer right away. He moved to one of the tanks, tapping a few buttons on a console next to it. The glass of the tank lit up, revealing the creature inside more clearly. It looked almost human, but its skin was a strange shade of green, and its eyes were wide and black, staring straight ahead. It was clear that the creature was not alive. It was as if it had been placed here, trapped in a moment of time. "This," the human said quietly, "is what they've been doing here. These creatures, these ... experiments, they're being harvested. Their life force is extracted to fuel something bigger, something more dangerous than you can imagine." The girl took a step closer, her eyes wide with shock. "Harvested? For what?" The human turned to face her, his expression grim. "For the alien network, the one running all of this. These beings are being drained. Their life essence used to power weapons, technology, and ships. This facility isn't just a slaughterhouse. It's a factory built to create and control." The girl could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. Why are they doing this? Why here, on Earth? The human looked away, his jaw tightening. Because Earth is one of the last free places left. The aliens have been infiltrating other worlds, controlling governments, people, resources. They've been laying the groundwork for years, but Earth ... it's still independent, and they need to change that. The girl took a deep breath, trying to make sense of everything. It was too much to understand, too much to take in all at once. Her mind spun, and for a moment she felt the urge to sit down, to shut it all out. But she couldn't. She had to keep going. There was no turning back now. So ... What happens to these creatures? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The human shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. Most of them ... They don't survive. They're used up, drained of everything they have, until they're nothing but husks. The ones that do survive are experimented on, made into something else. The aliens breed them, train them, use them as soldiers, workers, tools. The girl's stomach churned. The thought of beings, alive and conscious, being used like that, was too much for her to bear. It made her sick. How can you ... How can anyone be part of this? The human turned to her, his face softening. I didn't have a choice. Was part of a resistance group, trying to take them down. I volunteered for this mission because I knew what was at stake. But I didn't realize how deep it ran, how many lives were being destroyed to build their empire. The girl looked around the room, her eyes falling on the tanks once more. She felt a deep, helpless sorrow for the creatures trapped inside. Is there any way to stop this? Can we save them? The human looked at her with a mixture of sadness and determination. I hope so. But right now, we have to focus on getting out. We need to destroy this place, stop the flow of resources, and put an end to the operation before it spreads any further. The girl nodded, her mind made up. She couldn't just walk away from this. She couldn't let these creatures suffer any longer. She had to fight. Even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant putting herself in danger, she couldn't just turn her back. Not now. We do this together, she said, her voice filled with resolve. The human's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in his gaze. Together, he agreed. They both turned toward the door, ready to face whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but they had a chance if they worked together. If they kept pushing forward, they could stop the aliens. They could save this world, and maybe even those trapped in the tanks. But first, they had to make it out of the facility alive. A narrow escape. The human's eyes scanned the room one last time, his expression focused. The girl could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on them both. Every step they took now was a step closer to freedom, or a step closer to certain danger, but there was no turning back. She knew that. Are you ready? The human asked, his voice low but steady. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the makeshift weapon he had given her. Earlier, an alien stun gun, crude but effective. She didn't know if it would work, but it was all they had. I'm ready. They moved swiftly toward the door, the weight of their footsteps muted by the quiet hum of the facility. The hallways stretched out in front of them, endless and cold. The girl could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Every shadow, every sound, seemed to grow louder and closer as they navigated through the dimly lit corridors. The human led the way, his movements precise, calculated. She followed closely behind, trying to stay calm, trying to push away the thoughts of what could go wrong. But no matter how hard she tried, the fear kept creeping in. What if they didn't make it out? What if the aliens were already on their way? The human paused in front of another door, a large metal panel that hissed open at his touch. Beyond, it was a narrow staircase leading down into the bowels of the facility. The girl felt her stomach drop as they descended into the darkness. Every step felt like it took them further into the unknown. But there was no other choice. We're almost there, the human whispered, glancing at her over his shoulder. Just a little further. The girl's mind raced. What awaited them at the bottom of this staircase? Would they find a way out? Or was this just another trap set to keep them from escaping? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from above. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, and the unmistakable sound of alien soldiers approaching sent a chill down her spine. "We've been spotted," the girl said, her voice panicked. The human's face tightened, and he grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Keep moving," he urged, his voice sharp. "We don't have much time." They reached the bottom of the stairs, and the girl was immediately hit by a rush of cold air. The chamber they entered was large, with pipes running along the walls and machinery that hummed with life. It was a hidden section of the facility, far from the main operations, but it also felt like a maze. She had no idea where they were, but it was clear they had to move quickly. "We need to disable their tracking system," the human said, pulling her toward a control panel on the far wall. He worked quickly, his hands flying over the buttons as he input commands. The girl glanced around, her heart pounding in her chest. The soldiers would be here soon, and if they didn't get the tracking system down, they would never make it out. "How much longer?" she asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. The human didn't look up, his focus entirely on the panel. "Almost there," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Just give me a few more seconds." A loud crash echoed from the hallway above, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. The soldiers were getting closer, and soon they would be right on top of them. The girl's breath caught in her throat as the door to the chamber began to shake, the metal screeching as someone tried to force it open. "Move," the human shouted, grabbing her by the wrist and pulling her toward another door at the far end of the room. But before they could reach it, the door they had just entered burst open with a deafening bang. Two alien soldiers stood in the doorway, their massive forms blocking the exit. The girl froze, panic gripping her heart. There was no way out. They were trapped. "Get down," the human yelled, shoving her behind a nearby set of pipes. He pulled out the stun gun, aiming it at the aliens as they advanced into the room. The girl could hear their heavy breathing, their steps echoing in the vast chamber. The human fired first, the electric pulse from the stun gun hitting one of the soldiers square in the chest. The alien staggered back, its body convulsing for a moment before it crumpled to the ground. But the other soldier didn't hesitate. It raised its weapon, aiming it directly at the human. "No," the girl screamed, her voice raw with fear. Without thinking, she jumped out from behind the pipes, running toward the soldier. She didn't know what she was doing. She only knew that if she didn't act, the human would be shot. She grabbed a nearby metal rod and swung it with all her strength at the soldier's legs. The alien stumbled, thrown off balance for just a second. That was all the human needed. He fired again, this time hitting the second soldier in the chest. The alien fell with a thud, and the room fell into a tense silence. The girl's chest heaved with adrenaline, her body trembling as she looked down at the two fallen soldiers. Her heart was racing, but they couldn't stay here. They had to move. The human didn't waste any time. He grabbed her arm once more, pulling her toward the door. "Let's go," he urged. "We're almost there." But the girl couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The soldiers may have been taken down, but there were more out there, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. She glanced back one last time at the control panel, where the human had just disabled the tracking system. If they could make it to the exit now, they might actually escape. but every instinct told her that the hardest part was still ahead. With the sound of distant alarms ringing in their ears, they ran. A new beginning, the metallic door slammed shut behind them with a heavy clang, and the sudden silence that followed felt suffocating. The girl's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, her legs still shaking from the sprint through the alien facility. She could hear the distant wail of alarms blaring through the walls, but for the moment they were safe. At least for now. They were out, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. She looked around. This new place was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile hallways of the slaughterhouse. The had just escaped from the air felt fresher, though still heavy with the scent of metal and decay. The human led her through a narrow alley, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, always alert. They had made it through the worst of it, but the world outside the facility was still a mystery. She couldn't stop herself from looking back. The facility was now behind them, a massive, looming structure that felt like a nightmare in itself. Yet, she couldn't help but wonder how much worse it could get. The fear that had gripped her all this time was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. She wasn't sure if she even believed what she was asking. Could they truly leave all that behind? Could they move on from this place and start a new life? The human glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "We get as far away from here as possible," he replied, his voice steady but weary. "We can't stop now. There's still so much to be done." She felt a pang of uncertainty at his words. She had already been through so much, was there truly more to face? She looked at him, trying to make sense of what he meant. Was this truly over, or was it just the beginning of something even worse? "I don't understand," she said, her voice filled with confusion. "How are we supposed to stop all of this? We've escaped, yes, but how do we take down ... everything? How do we make it stop?" The human sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about one mission. It's not just about taking down one facility. This is bigger than that. The network we're up against is vast. This is just the beginning, but it's a step in the right direction." The girl frowned, trying to process his words. She had no idea what he meant by the network. But one thing was certain: escaping the slaughterhouse had only opened up more questions. It felt like they were walking into the unknown, and she didn't know if she was ready for that ... So, ... what now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where do we go from here?" The human paused, his eyes scanning the horizon. He looked almost lost in thought, as though considering the enormity of what they had just done. He finally turned back to her, a small but determined smile crossing his face. "We keep moving forward," he said firmly. "We find others who are willing to fight. We build a team. We expose them all. We bring them down." The girl's heart swelled with a mix of hope and fear. The thought of fighting back, of standing up to something so much larger than herself, was daunting. She wasn't sure she had the strength to continue. But something in his words, in the way he spoke, made her believe that it was possible. Maybe they could take this fight to them. Maybe they could make a difference after all. "What if we fail?" she asked, her voice shaking. The human turned to her, his eyes softer than before. "Then we try again, and again. We don't stop fighting. Not until we've won." For the first time since they had escaped the slaughterhouse, the girl felt a spark of hope ignite deep within her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her moving forward. She looked at him and nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and as long as they had that, they could face whatever came next. The human turned and began walking, his stride steady. The girl followed, taking one last look at the facility behind. Then before stepping into the unknown, together they would find a way to fight back, to expose the alien network and stop their operations. It wouldn't be easy, and they had no idea what lay ahead. But for the first time, the girl felt like she wasn't alone. She had a purpose now, and so did he. The journey had only just begun.